name's John Vestal. I head up CDN services for Pacnet. I'm going to spend a little bit of time, maybe a little different direction than I've seen this morning, and walk through why Pacnet decided to enter the CDN space and a little bit of how we did it. And then hand over to Andy from Edgecast, who is the vendor that we have chosen from a license perspective to deploy our CDN throughout Asia. Pacnet is an Asian carrier, which means we are dealing with massive number of languages, cultures, geographic distances, and it introduces some unique challenges to the delivery aspect of the CDN. This slide, and I like Gonzalo's presentation this morning where he said he wasn't going to get into telling you all the internet's growing. It is, we all know that. But what's interesting to me when I look at this slide is Asia represents roughly 60% of the world's population, but we're less than 40% of the broadband subscriber base across the globe. There's a large number of users that do not have internet access today, and the room for growth in that market is outpaced anywhere else in the world. How do we get there is the question that we have to look at. There's initiatives that are happening within individual markets that are helping to grow and expand that. You have places like China and India that represent the majority of the user base, 2 billion plus in those two markets alone, that are again underserved both in capacity to the end user and to the consumer of the content, but also by CDNs and content providers who can actually deliver and provide services to those individual markets. One of the things that we see in Asia that I think is a bit unique is the method that we deliver to the individual consumer. I know that when I first went to Asia in early 2000s, I was able to get a 100 meg DSL connection to my house for $19. I suspect most people in this room would be happy for an FE in your house for $19. We have in Singapore Gig E in your house now if you want to, and a fiber to the home solution. What has happened is you get this leapfrog effect. So as technologies become newer, they seem to come into the US and European markets first. And then as they become more adopted, the Asian markets will usually go to the next thing and cut ahead. And you saw it with frame relay and ATM. You saw it with CDMA and GSM. It's a common trend. And what we're seeing now is carriers deploying more and more fiber to the home solutions or high-speed broadband, at least, to the end user, allowing them to have access to more rich media content. The mobile side, I think, is a very interesting aspect. If we were sitting in Tokyo and I asked this question, how many mobile devices does each person have in their pocket? The average would probably be 4 per person sitting in the room. It's just a massive number of mobile users out there, and there's actually more mobile devices in the field than there are desktops and traditional ways of consuming traffic throughout a large part of Asia, which means when we look at broadband subscription numbers, we need to look at the mobile broadband as well as the fixed line broadband, and we have to be able to deliver solutions to all of those markets across the board. And again, these are all underserved markets as of this moment, and a lot of that has to do with intellectual property rights and cultural issues. But the opportunities there, when we looked at that, and these are all sitting in countries where we have infrastructure, became very attractive opportunity for us to increase stickiness with our customer base and bring CDN on as a new revenue line, not necessarily for cost reduction on our backbone. As we just said, Asia is growing faster than the rest of the world. I think it was in the previous session I saw this morning where they said video represents 90% of CDN delivery as of today. In Asia, it's around, my screen's too small, I can't read it, but I think the chart on the right says it's going to go to around 40% of the delivery is going to be video, but the rest of that is going to be traditional content as we're used to today. And looking at that, we try to figure out why that's happening. And yes, we have countries, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, where we have very large broadband capabilities, but then we have places like China, India, Indonesia, where we're limited to 128, 256K circuits into the house. So we're still stuck back in much lower resolution video even in lots of cases, content that is non-video based at all to deal with those low bandwidths that are being delivered into the individual households. Video is definitely growing, and we will see that trend, but it's going to be video on a mobile device is our analysis, and not video on the desktop that's going to drive the video expansion within Asia. The consumer base in Asia is definitely on an upward swing. There's what we call national generation networks, which are government-led initiatives to provide high-speed internet into every household. The joke in Singapore is that every single tree in Singapore will have a gig E delivered to the tree. And they do this based on studies that link GDP directly to broadband penetration rates. And as we look at countries that are being completely redeveloped, such as Vietnam, for example, they have the opportunity to lay fiber into every single home, into every single hamlet, and provide level of services in there that if we could do it again in the rest of the world, we probably would do differently today than we did 20 years ago when we were still fighting to get copper access into each individual household. The typical deployment for CDNs throughout Asia are the big countries, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, and that's where everyone places their POPs today. But what we see is a bigger trend of consumption of content, obviously in places like China and India, but we also have Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, which are not necessarily seen as first-tier locations for POP deployments. When we come back and look at our individual strategy, because of the language differences, content seems to stay local in markets. So by putting in smaller POPs across the entire region, we're able to provide a better reach to the entire consumer base across Asia. Again, Pacnet's a regional provider, so we're able to leverage what we already have in our backbone today, and we don't have to focus on other markets, and that comes in through Edgecast and our federation with Edgecast. When we look at the way content, even bits in general, are delivered in Asia, it's extremely different than the way they're delivered in the United States and the rest of the world. The majority of our traffic, and again, I can't read that slide, I think it's 80%, of bits that are delivered for any purpose, be it voice, data, content, are delivered on subsea infrastructure throughout Asia. So there's a massively expensive infrastructure that's tying every country together throughout Asia in order to deliver content or to deliver data between those markets. And that drives not only the economics of how expensive transit is in the market or how expensive content is to deliver in the market, it also drives latency in the market and peering relationships in the market and being able to get as much content localized as you can with the highest number of peering groups or peering populations so that you do not have to transit a subsea backbone is critical in order to provide the best solution at a cost-effective rate to your customer base. And again, when we looked at this from Pacnet's perspective, we had lots of options, as Simon had described earlier. And what we looked at is said, there's a great market here, and we need to find some way to leverage that and provide a service to our customer that's currently not being served. This is an interesting example of what happens with these NGN networks. So Australia has had this plan in place for a couple of years to rebuild their entire infrastructure and put a gig E into every household. If they do that, they'll have basically around 8 petabits of domestic capacity that consumers can use in order to consume traffic or content in Australia. But if you look at the amount of subsea infrastructure, and remember 80% of the traffic is coming in by subsea, if you look at the amount of subsea traffic that's able to come into Australia, it's, I can't read my screen, it's about 0.2%. It's 16 terabits of capacity, but there's a consumption base of almost 8 petabits of consumption there in that domestic market. I don't know how they're going to be able to offer the level of service and take advantage of that and therefore justify the expense of building out that infrastructure if we don't look at caching within Australia directly and providing ways to offload the backbones that are delivering in Australia directly. And ironically, if you look at cable infrastructure, Australia is one of the most expensive markets to get into and out of from a subsea cable perspective. that's all great. Pacnet came in. We built a regional CDN. We have a strong platform throughout Asia. But content's global. We all know that content's global. And the next step for us, or the key for us, was being able to share other people's traffic, other people's CDN capacity, so that we can have a complete footprint of a global CDN and have it be completely transparent to my end user. There was a question in the earlier session this morning about, do you believe in federation? And our answer is yes, most definitely. I have no relationships or very limited relationships in Europe and US and Latin America and the rest of the world. Our go-forward strategy has always been to leverage other federation partners that can deliver content on our behalf. And the opposite is true as well, obviously. Federation for us allows us to immediately have a global footprint, but still focus where our strengths are and where we have the relationships and where we have our own background and infrastructure. So one of the things that Pacnet faces is we deal with a market where customers are used to a turnkey solution. Customers don't want to go and build separate or go and buy different pieces to glue an entire solution together. They don't want to use a video encoding company for the encoding aspects, somebody else for content management, DRM. They want a complete solution that provides them all of their needs for their content distribution or meets all their requirements for content distribution. Pacnet is, as Telefona mentioned this morning, we're a carrier. We do really well at delivering bits across wires. We're not necessarily into those other value-added services, but we know we need a complete solution. So the advantage for doing a licensed solution to us was I'm not tied to any one technology. I can pick best-of-breed vendors and build a complete turnkey CDN solution that meets my customers' needs, provide them the one-stop shop, single support number, all of that, but leveraged on top of the best solutions out there in order to meet their individual needs for what they're looking for. I've worked in the States for a bit, and I think this is a bit unique for the Asian market in that, even very large companies that I would expect them to be able to handle their own encoding, for example, they want to offload that and get that into a single source for the entire solution. Have one neck to ring, is what we like to say, and usually it's mine. And again, the licensing solution gives us that capability. So just quickly to wrap up here, what we see for us, the key for entering the Asian market is one, as you can see, it's a very underserved market at this moment. And it's a very strong market for us because we own the majority of the backbone in Asia. I think 80% or 60% of all submarine cable in Asia is owned by Pacnet, so we control the majority of that infrastructure. But not being a telco and knowing what our limitations are, we consciously made the decision not to build it ourselves. We made a decision to go and find a partner, a license through that partner, and leverage them to provide their core technology, which is what Edgecast has done an amazing job at. And then federation for us, we won't succeed without federation. That has been a key point to what we're doing, and we currently are federating with Edgecast. And it's the way that I believe, as someone said this morning, industry's going to shrink eventually. Federations are going to start to consolidate, and there will be definitely more and more of these regional CDNs that build the best global CDN because we're each targeting our own markets, where we have our own backbones, and we can focus on building up those individual markets much better than if we had to deal with a global footprint. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andy. Yeah.
So the title of the presentation was How Pacnet is Accelerating Content Delivery in Asia. And I wanted to actually talk a little less about the products that Edgecast offers, but talk a little more about why this is exciting for us. Can I go to the next slide? So why would Edgecast enable a competitor in the CDN space? And that's the question I get all the time when we think about licensing. And in general, it's enabling a competitor, but if we go to the next slide, there's a lot of reasons for us to do it. And I think we're having some scanning issues.
It's not me.
But everybody's been talking about growth of demand here, and you guys are dealing with that on the carrier side. We're a large network too, and the growth of demand that we're seeing is phenomenal. And we have to put a lot of effort to grow this capacity everywhere, and in a lot of cases there isn't enough incentive for us to build regionalized CDN. And there's a lot of difficult markets. So John talked about the various languages and pieces that exist today in the CDN space, and it is hard for us to get in there and actually succeed as successfully as somebody who's in region. So if we talk about what the growth of demand is for us, in 2011 our revenue doubled. We added 1,000 new customers, effectively adding 25% to our network. Traffic essentially doubled as well. So we have a big problem as an operator in maintaining that capacity. And again, this translates to a problem directly to all the carriers. And where this is changing is that as our customer base grows, the demand for in-region delivery has grown significantly as well. And it's actually really resource intensive to add lots and lots of smaller POPs where we wouldn't have a lot of traffic. But when we combine that with Pacnet's demand and our building in there, the ability to deploy into a lot of smaller regions becomes feasible, and the footprint of the CDN becomes much better. In terms of difficult markets, and I'm sure a lot of people know stories about getting into these markets, the economics of getting into India and Korea and China, among others, is really difficult just in general, and for a lot of different reasons. They all have their own sort of rule sets and things like that. And unless you sort of have the knowledge and ability to set up shop there, it's a very expensive proposition to build out there. But for us, with Pacnet and Pacnet licensing our software, it's simply a peering relationship. So we just agree to buy a certain amount of capacity on the network. They go and build it and use their relationships to build in those markets. And it's kind of a turnkey solution for us to really grow out the network that Edgecast has to sell to its customers. So, and this is generally brief, but I wanted to talk about how much this changes our network. So today, Edgecast has 5 Asian locations, and they're the exact ones that John mentioned earlier, Singapore, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Sydney. What changes is with Pacnet, by the end or sometime through 2000 this year, I think we'll have 15 POPs available in Asia, which we would not have built on our own, but the importance of Asia continues to grow, especially as, for US-based customers or for European-based customers, and getting Asian content into market becomes a lot more important. But the focus on regional growth by Pacnet really allows us to improve that service. And so we're going to share in growth with them and allow our core CDN that we operate today to actually provide better service while they're growing the CDN in the region. And then it actually cuts down a lot on our resources to not have to build as much in region to be competitive in that space. That was it.
So I think we have time for questions. And I will make it quick with them. Can we turn it off?
Are there any questions?
Yeah, so the question was, do we have subscribers or do we connect other networks? A little bit of both. We kind of probably 50-50 between a carrier's carrier. So China Telecom, all of those guys are using our infrastructure to tie their network together and get tuned from the US and Europe, for example. And then we also have an enterprise solution for offering IPVPN and PLS, things of that nature for the enterprise marketplace.
Yeah, the reason I asked, I was wondering how valuable is it to get content from yours during colo, and how much more valuable is it to get it a little bit closer to the VSLAM or CMTS?
Yeah, so the question was, how close do you have to get? Where do we have to put the content to make it effective? For the most part, the countries that we're talking about are relatively small. So we can go in to Hong Kong, Singapore, places like that, and we can hit a few key high, in those markets just one, but even in Malaysia, Thailand, a few key high-density cities, and we can provide a much better level of service than if it's all coming through Hong Kong, going through HKIX in the Hong Kong market. There are definitely other markets that are more challenging where you have a large geography. China, India, Australia are the ones that come to mind, where we have to get closer to that last mile. But again, getting from Japan down to Australia is 100 milliseconds of latency. So just by moving that content into Australia, we could knock a large piece of latency off of that. Yeah, I can't make it go faster. I keep trying.
How close are your content to the caches to the subscriber?
In Canada, again?
Or on your network?
On network, what we do is we have data centers in the largest metropolitan areas in Canada, so nationwide. So we traverse the continent essentially.
Now, I might be thinking of this the wrong way, but a lot of times when I think about Limelight is the older content delivery network versus Edgecast being just a newer competitor in the space. So I guess two questions. How do you guys kind of see each other, and how do the customers who look at potential partners, how do you think about it, number one? Number two, what does that do to Limelight's business model now that you're partnering with people that you could potentially, in some ways, also be competing against?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, how do we feel about creating competitors? Well, we don't feel like we're creating competitors. Bell Canada are a fantastic ally. They have, great business relationships, and how many feet on the street?
Well, it depends on who you ask. But yeah, I mean, essentially, we are providing a sales channel for Limelight in Canada, the same way any other partner, a regional partner, would do the same. So you can call it being competitor, or you call it being sort of an enabler at the end of the day.
But I think it's also worth looking at the fundamental economics of the business. So core CDN used to be a great business. 5 years ago, we'd be achieving 60, maybe 70% margin in that business. Today, 30, 40. So, that's why I believe core CDN's Transit 2.0. We've reinvented ourselves as a software as a solutions business that happens to sit on this massively scaled global computing platform, which is our legacy. But, we are increasingly targeting our sales force in terms of attach rates of value-added services, and this is all public and in the public domain. At the beginning of 2011, I think we had a 12% attach rate of value-added services within our sales organization, and in the final quarter, we had a 39% attach rate, and we're targeting 75% attach rate by the end of 2012. These guys are doing a 50% attach rate, so these guys are ahead of the curve in terms of Limelight's own sales team, but we've got a lot of legacy deals that are core only. But that's in isolation, that's no longer a great business to be in. We firmly believe that we've had to move significantly up the value stack and change the way that we sell.
And how Edgecast versus Limelight, how that all plays out?
I'm going to get out of this one.
Today we're competitors. Edgecast have a federated offering. I think the great thing about federations is there are now a good deal of federations to choose from. So I think today federations are vendor-driven, and Limelight have not marketed it this way, but we've had a federation of partners and transit providers that we've been exchanging traffic with for years. I think that those federations will converge at some point. How long that'll take will depend on how long it takes to establish some standards. But then the question is, which standards do we choose? The great thing about standards is there's so many of them. And if you look at the fundamentals there are 40,000 different devices that can receive or consume some form of IP-based content. To get that content from origin to device, there are over 1,000 recipes in terms of origin, transcode, and then render for the device. And if you look at the guys who are making those devices, you've got Apple that are refusing to support Flash on the iPad. You've got Samsung and Apple that are going head to head, and they all want to be able to, steal the higher ground in terms of what those standards are, and they're not going to let go of that. So the ability to be able to influence roadmaps at a network layer, that's going to be a tough one. The ability to do it at a software as a service layer, I think you've got a better shot at it, but at a network layer, I think that's going to be a long haul to establish those standards.
From an Edgecast perspective, we are competitors with Limelight and Akamai, and we are a CDN operator. But the way we view the market's a little different. Rather than just saying there's a race to zero in the market, there's a lot of carriers out there, and a race to zero on the market means there's a race to zero on DSL services and a race to zero on broadband. And the CDN's going to play part of getting the value chain back into the carrier, and whether that's charging for traffic and monetizing it on mobile, or selling CDN over IPTV, or any one of those flavors of it. And so, Edgecast has been part of this ecosystem that sits in between the carriers and the content providers for a long time, but we see a shift there. So for us, partnering with carriers becomes, I think, a key part of getting to the future, and that's the way we're playing in that. And also the growth is so large that I think there's enough room for a lot of people to play in the space right now.
Question at the back.
Yeah, for the carriers, maybe I missed it. Can you talk a little bit about your strategy within CDN in terms of how aggressive you'll be in terms of targeting very commercial CDN market versus your own customers versus reducing costs? And how does that affect the decision to partner, build, or buy? How might that change?
And sorry, who's that question directed at?
Carriers.
Carriers? So we've got two carriers at the table.
I don't think I understood your question. I'm sorry.
So in terms of strategy, CDN strategy,
Yes.
are you primarily directed at being a commercial CDN, attacking outside customers, mostly their own internal customers, or mostly a cost saving?
Oh, I see. Okay, so the question was whether or not we're directing our CDN mostly for external consumption or for internal use. The answer is yes. We use a CDN both for our internal purposes. Bell Canada, over the last couple of years, has become one of the largest content providers in the country, if not the largest content provider, having acquired the two largest network, and as well as a new specialty network as well. So we do use CDN internally to drive content, but we also have a strong focus on selling it to our enterprise market as well, our enterprise account base. We have thousands of customers in the enterprise sector, and essentially we're targeting those as well for CDN.
We're a bit different. We don't really have a consumer base. We provide services to other carriers as a transit operator and as a enterprise provider. So for us, it wasn't as much on reducing cost of delivery. It was opening new markets for us. So both as a direct CDN operator, as well as back into, or as you were saying, outside opportunities, as well as going back into our existing enterprise customer base and offering services to them. So for us, it was a way to increase stickiness and increase top-line revenues.
Any more questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Oh,
very
there's a
much.
question over there. Sorry.
Oh, one more question
Yeah,
over
one
here.
more.
In our networks, we're seeing a large amount of content from Asia being watched and consumed in the U.S. via applications like Turnkey. Do you think the federation of content that you're launching with Pure App will distribute that content throughout the U.S. application systems and things like that, and that would be part of the federation content distribution between countries?
I suspect that's more to you because it was
Yeah.
Pure App.
Well, no, I mean, it's not Pure App there. In the federation between Pacnet and Edgecast, if there was a Pacnet customer that was sending traffic to somebody in the U.S., they would be terminating on the Edgecast network to deliver that, or to one of the other federation partners in the U.S., and that would essentially allow them to get their content closer to the eyeballs and relieve stress on your network, or on sort of the under-channel between U.S. and Asia markets, and actually significantly decrease latency.
That's it.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.